In January of 1914, 7 grizzled veterans of Oregon's criminal justice system in the Philippine insurrection were sent into a lawless town of rugged frontiersmen. Their goal? Resigning councilmen, closing saloons, and shutting down gambling halls. Their leader, a female secretary, standing only 5 feet tall and weighing 108 pounds. In 1904, the state of Oregon passed a Local Option Act, allowing local governments to enact prohibition independently from each other. When Baker County in eastern Oregon enacted prohibition using the Local Option Act in 1912, the remote hamlet of Copperfield defied the new law. As a result, Oregon's progressive governor Oswald West sent his secretary Fern Hobbs to the town. The tense situation led to the declaration of martial law and a conflict between the state and saloon owners, serving as a preview of the heavy-handed enforcement tactics the government would use in the next 2 decades in its battle against alcohol. Before statehood, the sparsely populated Oregon Territory first enacted a type of prohibition law, trying to stop the introduction and distillation of alcohol. The temperance movement would claim a victory in 1904, when citizens approved the Local Option Act, leaving counties and towns to be able to decide for themselves if they would be wet or dry. Over the next 2 years, several counties and cities used the new act to implement prohibition within their borders. When Baker County put prohibition to a vote of its citizens in 1908, the eastern Oregon county declared itself dry. Despite the ban, one rough town located on the Snake River, far removed from the county seat, didn't have any intention of following the new law. Faraway Copperfield, Oregon was filled with a population of laborers working on 2 area projects, between a power plant dam rising on the nearby Snake River and the construction of a railroad tunnel. Hundreds of rough men were now calling the town home. By 1907, the population rose to 1,200 people and boasted businesses up and down Main Street, including 11 saloons and the same amount of brothels. Most nights, large number of the populace went to the saloons to drink and gamble. By 1914, after the projects had been completed, the town saw a mass exodus, and the population of the once bustling city dwindled to only 80 people. But the illegal businesses still operated. Copperfield's mayor, H.A. Stewart, one of the most well-known men in the town, who always carried 2 revolvers, owned the most active saloon. 2 other members of the town council, including William Wagon, also operated saloons, while a third made a living as a bartender. When prohibition was enacted in the county, the townspeople simply ignored it, feeling that they were so far out on the frontier that no one would know or care to do anything about it. And for almost 10 years, they were right. But on the other side of the state, over 400 miles away, Oregon's Governor Oswald West, an ardent supporter of prohibition, who had once declared that one of his ambitions was to shoot a bartender, received reports of alcohol still flowing in Copperfield, along with gambling, which was also illegal. In 1913, West ordered Sheriff Ed Rand of Baker County to shut down Copperfield's remaining saloons, but he refused. Governor West replied that if Copperfield was not cleaned by Christmas, the state would get involved. Rand never followed through with the governor's orders. On January 2, 1914, West decided to send his diminutive personal secretary, Fern Hobbs, to the scene, accompanied by Lieutenant Colonel B.K. Lawson, who is part of the Coastal Artillery and a warden at the Oregon State Prison. 5 Oregon National Guardsmen picked out by Lawson and the Chief of Penitentiary Guards named Frank Snodgrass. All of the men were veterans of the Philippine insurrection. Hundreds of people came to the small town to see Hobbs' attempt to enforce the governor's will. Hobbs' physical appearance may not have been intimidating, but her determination was. Exercising the authority given to her by Governor West, Hobbs called an immediate meeting of the city council, where she demanded the mayor and councilmen give up the positions they held and turn in their resignations immediately. The governor had given orders that if the men refused to resign, Colonel Lawson was to declare martial law. The councilmen refused. At 4 p.m. on the same day, Fern Hobbs boarded a train and returned to Baker City for the night. and then to Portland the next day. As she left, Lawson read off the declaration of martial law and confiscated all the weapons in the town, amounting to 170 pistols and numerous knives, then arrested the mayor and councilmen. The guardsmen followed up by patrolling the town and saloons the rest of the day and night. They met with little resistance besides Warren and Wagon attempt to escape that night by horse, but quickly arrested them again. The next day, they were reinforced by an additional 10 guardsmen who had arrived that morning, and they all began the real work of cleaning up the town. The guardsmen worked on moving all the alcohol, gambling products, and the saloon equipment onto a train car, where they would be taken to be disposed of. Lawson appointed Sam Grimm, a local carpenter and cooperative citizen, as the new mayor of Copperfield. By the time Copperfield was finally clean, Fern Hobbs was already back at her desk at Governor West's office in Salem. She would later get almost all the credit for what happened at Copperfield, and nearly became a world-renowned hero for her role in the conflict. She received many letters from the public thanking her for her bold actions in Copperfield, and numerous men asked for her hand in marriage. In her later life, she insisted that the subject bored her, and would rather speak of her assistance with searching for missing American soldiers in France in 1918. Mayor Stewart and the Copperfield councilmen sought the revenge in the courts on February 14th. They followed up their humiliation at the hands of Hobbs by bringing a lawsuit against the governor and Colonel Lawson, feeling that their civil rights were violated. The case would later be argued in circuit court in Baker City, where the jury sided with the ousted city leaders, declaring that what Lawson had done was unconstitutional. But West wired Lawson, who was still posted in Copperfield, and told him to ignore the court's decision. In November of 1914, the case was heard at the Oregon Supreme Court, and in West v. Wagon, the state's highest court excused the saloon owners for their violations of the Prohibition law, but compromised that the saloons of Copperfield would stay closed permanently. The saloons had provided most of the revenue for the tiny eastern Oregon town, and after they had been shut down for good in 1914, the once thriving outpost would become a ghost town. The saloons at the center of the conflict and the rest of the town, except the post office and schoolhouse, all burned down in 1915, believed to be started by an arsonist. Ex-Mayor H.A. Stewart was shot while working on a fence outside of Copperfield not long after the event took place. He was hit in the torso but survived the assassination attempt. The shooter was never found. Governor Oswald West never did rescind martial law in the town and kept National Guardsmen stationed there to act as peace officers. In 1915, James Whitcomb, Oregon's next governor, ended martial law in Copperfield, even though, by then, the town was long gone. Lieutenant Colonel Lawson went on to be a reformer of Oregon's prison system, which had one of the most cruel prison standards in the nation. Even though he was not widely publicized by the media during his lifetime, he was the true hero behind the Copperfield event. He held together a small band of militiamen against hundreds of antagonistic frontiersmen, and never had to fire a bullet. The Copperfield conflict served as an example of what Prohibition could look like on a larger scale when the state of Oregon abolished alcohol on a statewide level in 1914. The affair demonstrated how far the state government would go to stop alcohol use, even in the most remote corner of the state. But not everyone was convinced that this was an example of what was to come. Pro-alcohol groups initially thought of Oswald West as a laughingstock because he had the nerve to send a woman to clean up a tiny frontier town. But what happened in Copperfield served notice to the public that the government would spare no pain in cleaning up the state, an aggressive approach that would later be duplicated in towns across America.